Negotiation is an absolutely key skill. Everybody realizes that when big deals or major disputes are involved. But negotiation is also critical for dealing internally, dealing with people who you really need their wholehearted cooperation. And you have elements of command, you've got inducements, but you need their commitment. And negotiation is a key managerial tool for that. Also, with the pace of change increasing so quickly, whatever arrangements you've got in place, you really need to be able efficiently to renegotiate new agreements. And as business globalizes, and there's a great diversity of people on the other side of the table, different cultures, different genders, different company styles, your negotiation capacity is even stronger, even more important. Great negotiators always try to create as much value as they can, economic and non-economic. They try to claim a full share of that value and do so in a way that works for the long term on a sustainable basis. To create and claim value for the long term really requires acting in what we sometimes call three dimensions. The most familiar is tactics, and good tactics, moving from positions to underlying interests, building trust, active listening. We're familiar with these skills and they're critical. A second dimension is deal design, and that's the art and science of unlocking value from situations, whether it's a simple buy-sell agreement or a more complex trade with contingencies and risk-sharing provisions that has to play out over time. Deal design is critical as well. Less well understood and probably less well acknowledged, except by truly great negotiators, is the importance of setup. And these are the moves away from the table that make sure that you've got the right parties, dealing with the right issues, having built up the right no-deal alternatives or walk-away alternatives, in some cases worsening those of the other side, and orchestrating the process in the most promising possible sequence. All of those elements, parties, no-deal options, sequence and process plan, are key. Great negotiators act away from the table so that they've got the most promising setup once they're in place. Now, there are many, many different forms of that. So if we think about the parties, an example I ran into recently involved a board of directors that had chosen a new CEO. Very private process. They provisionally chose a new CEO, but the deal depended on the compensation package. So the board members looked around and said, who do we have that's got lots of negotiating experience and really has the interests of the company at heart? And they focused on the inside general counsel. Great experience, very ethical. And so the board tasked the general counsel to go negotiate the compensation package with the CEO candidate. Now, that negotiation did not go well at all. And the question is why? Well, if you think about it, there were a couple of big problems with the setup. On the other side of the table was a very well prepared CEO candidate with good advice. But most importantly, as the negotiation progressed, the inside general counsel realized that at the conclusion of this negotiation, which would almost certainly happen, the CEO candidate would be his boss. And so as your first act to grind down your new boss's compensation, it's probably a bad situation. Now, that was not a problem with tactics or deal design. That's a problem with the wrong party there. The board should have chosen somebody without that kind of conflict. And the wrong agent is frequently an issue of this kind. Other examples having to do with the sequence and the way things play out. A British company decided to sell off a division. They were going to sell it and get, they hoped, a good chunk of cash that they could use to fund higher strategic priorities. They looked around for natural buyers of this division, and it was pretty clear that an Australian company was the most promising candidate, the sort of natural buyer. So the chief executive of the British firm, who turned out to have gone to school with the Australian chief executive, got on the phone, said, "We've got this property, looks like it'd be very helpful to you. We're going to be disposing of it and use the funds for higher strategic priorities. Are you interested?" Well, the Australian CEO was interested, but said, we're terribly busy. And to get my people to do this transaction justice, we really need a 6 or an 8 month exclusive, and then we can devote the focus to that. Well, imagine the poor number 2 to the British chief executive flying off to Sydney with an urgent mandate to get the maximum price for this new division, and suddenly realizing that he had no alternatives and was foreclosed from talking to anybody else for 8 months. Essentially, his no-deal option had been inadvertently destroyed, and as a function of tactics or deal design, he just had managed to mess up his own setup. And there are many examples of this. I think of perhaps another, and then let's pull these things together. When Volkswagen and the chief executive was really bidding against BMW for Rolls-Royce. The bidding got significant. Unfortunately, the intellectual property, the name Rolls-Royce and some other elements, was actually owned by a third party who wouldn't talk to either Volkswagen or BMW. Volkswagen CEO did the deal, paid for Rolls-Royce, and only then turned to the negotiation with the intellectual property owner who owned the name Rolls-Royce and some key design elements. Imagine how that negotiation was set up. If you were redoing it, you'd reverse the sequence and have a very different kind of deal design. What I'm suggesting is that in many, many cases, you need to think away from the table. Have you got the right parties? How's the no-deal options? Has the sequence and basic process plan well thought out and put you in an advantageous as opposed to a disadvantageous situation? So setup, deal design, and tactics are all dimensions that you want working for you when you're trying to create as much value as you can, end up with a full share of that, and do it for the long term. To me, teaching, especially by way of examples and detailed case studies, is almost like storytelling. You set up a situation that was really challenging to the protagonists, the people who were actually faced with it. Then you throw out the question, what would you do at this particularly difficult moment in the negotiation? People are up against it. They themselves have to think about what would make sense. And I think along with them. Then we roll the tape forward and say, well, what did happen? What did they do? What worked? What didn't work? Why? Under what circumstances might something else have been more promising? And then how do we generalize past this situation? It's kind of a storytelling that I learn as much from an experienced set of participants as perhaps they do from these examples that we've put together to support and illustrate the broader framework. It's a lot of fun.